My daughter-in-law had banished me to the servants' table that night, all because I arrived late to her ostentatious birthday gala. Late, yes, but only because I had stopped on the side of the highway to help a stranded woman fix her car. A small act of kindness, and yet it had been met with scorn and humiliation. She had seated me far from my own grandchildren, tucked away among the nondescript staff seats, as if my very presence was an inconvenience to her carefully curated world of elite guests. Every laugh, every clink of glasses from the main table felt like a personal indictment, a reminder of my supposed inadequacy. Then the woman from the highway appeared no longer a stranger, but a billionaire whose mere presence made the night shimmer with unexpected energy. She stepped forward and dropped an announcement that turned the entire gala upside down, leaving the crowd gasping, the elite murmuring, and me speechless. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. I stared at the photo, trembling in my hands, the paper worn and creased from constant handling. Simon and Grace frozen in last summer's sunlight, their gap-toothed smiles bright and innocent against the fading background. They were 10 and 8 now. 10 and 8. When had I last held them in my arms? My thumb traced Grace's pigtails softly, almost as if I could feel them in real life. 3 months had passed since Christmas. 3 months since Mabel's voice on the phone. "Sorry, Reuben. The kids have that stomach bug going around," she had said casually, dismissing my longing. And yet just a week later, Seth's Instagram betrayed the truth. Simon and Grace building snowmen in Aspen, bundled in designer jackets, laughter frozen in picture-perfect frames that cut through me like glass. The leather armchair creaked beneath me as I shifted my hand, reaching for the cordless phone on the side table. My coffee had gone stone cold hours ago, still stained with lipstick from Martha's favorite mug. I kept using it anyway, as if by some miracle she might walk through that door, ask why I hadn't called the kids yet, smile at me with that warmth I'd missed so desperately. It was 7:30 on a Monday evening. Seth would have been home from his IT job, maybe helping with homework, perhaps watching cartoons with the children, as Grace laughed and Simon furrowed his brow in concentration over a particularly tricky math problem. My finger hovered over the speed dial. Number 2, right after the house phone, though Martha's number remained number 1. I could never bring myself to delete it. The phone rang twice before Seth picked up. "Hello." His voice carried the chaos of family life in the background. Television chatter, children arguing about something trivial. The ordinary clamor of a house full of life. "Seth? Hi?" "It's Dad," I said, clearing my throat, straightening in the chair as though posture alone could bridge the months and miles between us. "Listen, what could I get Mabel for her birthday?" Silence stretched over the line like a chasm. Then Grace's voice floated up behind him. "Mom, Simon won't let me, Dad. We're not planning anything grand." Seth interjected, sounding tired, distracted. "Just a small dinner with the closest people." A small dinner. Closest people. The words sank into my chest, heavy as stones. Of course. Right. But perhaps something nice, I thought. Flowers. A little gesture. I could stop by that boutique on Clark Street. I could make the effort. Maybe, just maybe, they'd invite me. "Maybe we'll invite you too." Seth said the word hanging there, casual, almost like a thought that had no weight. Maybe. Could I see the grandchildren? I blurted the question before I could think better of it. It had been so long. Grace, "Stop bothering your brother," Seth scolded gently in the background, then returned to the phone. "Sorry, Dad. Dinner's getting cold." Mabel's calling everyone to the table. I leaned back, holding the phone like it was my only lifeline to the family I ached to be near. My heart swelled with longing, and love mingled with the bitter taste of helplessness. And yet, there was still hope. Of course. I just thought I really needed to go. "Thanks for calling about the gift idea." The line went dead before I could say anything else. I pressed the phone to my ear for a few moments longer, as if sheer will could somehow bring her back on the line, before finally placing it gently on the side table. The dial tone hummed insistently in the silence that followed. Through the thin walls of the apartment, Mrs. Patterson's television blared a game show. Winners celebrating, confetti floating, audience cheering, as if the world outside my solitude still believed in easy victories. I drew my notebook closer, the small battered one I'd used for work orders decades ago, when my hands were steady capable when I fixed engines rather than trembling over family photos and scraps of memory. I opened to a blank page, drew a careful line beneath yesterday's date, and wrote in bold black letters, Mabel, birthday, Thursday. Below it, I added the note I could hardly admit aloud. Small dinner, closest people. The calendar on the coffee table caught my eye. April 21st circled in red ink. Thursday the 24th lay bare, empty, expectant. 3 days. 3 days to figure out how to be someone worth including, someone worth noticing. My gaze wandered to the mantelpiece crowded with relics of a life that seemed further away than ever. Grace losing her first tooth, Simon with his Little League trophy, both children helping Martha in her garden, laughter, captured in frozen smiles. All memories from this very house, back when Sunday dinners meant something, when we believed family could be counted on, could be trusted to gather and hold one another close. I closed the photo album but left Simon and Grace's photograph tucked between the pages of my notebook, a talisman against my own uncertainty. Tomorrow I would plan gifts, think of small gestures that might open doors, crack a smile, make me part of the family again. But tonight I simply counted the hours until Thursday, tracing the empty square on the calendar with my finger and circling it with a pen, trying to breathe life into a date that felt more like a test than a celebration. 20 hours later, dirt clung stubbornly to my fingernails as I crouched between tomato plants in the backyard. The warm Tuesday sun pressed against my shoulders through the worn flannel shirt. Each seedling demanded attention, a small act of care, something Martha had taught me before cancer stole her voice, before absence became a permanent companion, and then everything else, chores, errands, the endless quiet, punctuated by brief, hollow interruptions. "Looking good, Reuben," Mrs. Patterson called from her kitchen window. I waved, straightened my creaking back, and trudged over to the mailbox for the third time that afternoon, a faint hope thrumming in my chest. Maybe a card, maybe a catalog with something appropriate for a 40-year-old businesswoman I barely knew. Empty again. Bills, grocery flyers, nothing that mattered. The cordless phone rang from inside the house. I jogged to the back door, brushing soil from my palms on the dish towel hanging by the sink. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hesitation caught in my chest, but I answered. "Hello, this is Reuben." "Reuben, this is Mabel." Her voice came crisp and controlled, carrying the sharp professionalism of her environmental consulting firm. No warmth, no small talk, only precision. "I'm calling about my birthday on Thursday." I fumbled for my notebook, pen ready. "Yes, Seth mentioned you might. I'm inviting you to join us," she said without a pause, as if the words themselves were business, not pleasure. "It'll be at Lakeview Manor Restaurant just outside the city. An elite place." She paused. I heard the soft shuffle of papers. Thursday evening, 7 o'clock sharp. Lakeview Manor. I wrote it down carefully, my handwriting shaky despite the control I tried to exert. Lakeview Manor Elite Place, 7 p.m. My heart thumped in my chest. That's wonderful, Mabel. Thank you for including me. Dress appropriately," she added, and the line went quiet except for the sound of her typing, multitasking. Always busy, always, with priorities I could never hope to compete with. I stared at the words on the page. The address, the time, the emphasis on formality. It was a world I was no longer certain I belonged to. I hesitated, then dared ask, my voice careful, probing. "Mabel, Seth mentioned it would be a simple dinner. This, this sounds quite fancy." A pause. Then her voice returned, clipped, firm, but not unkind. "It is what it is, Reuben. I hope you'll be on time." I nodded at the empty air, the words unspoken, but felt I will be there. I will try. Plans changed. Her tone left no room for negotiation. It suggested the conversation was over, that this was no longer a simple casual dinner. "It'll be a grand celebration now. Bring a substantial gift." "Of course," I murmured, voice quieter than I intended, almost lost under the hum of the old refrigerator in the background. "Will Simon and Grace be there?" "They'll be there. Don't disappoint them by showing up underdressed." The dial tone buzzed in my ear, final and unyielding. I held the phone in my hand, as if physical contact might somehow tether me to the conversation that had just ended. Substantial gift, grand celebration, elite restaurant. Each word replayed in my mind, a drumbeat of anxiety and anticipation. My old computer groaned to life under my fingers, taking 5 minutes to boot up, then another 3 to establish a connection to the internet. By the time the Lakeview Manor website finally loaded, it felt as if the world outside had slowed to a crawl just to give me time to absorb the details. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, crystal chandeliers, reflecting sunlight like shards of liquid gold. Chicago's premier dining experience, the header boasted, where elegance meets excellence. I scrolled through the menu trying not to let my mouth hang open. Appetizers started at $38. $38. I imagined Martha shaking her head at me for staring too long at numbers instead of imagining the smiles on our grandchildren's faces. Private dining rooms could accommodate 50 guests each, overlooking Lake Michigan through floor-to-ceiling windows. 50 people. 50 people I would have to navigate politely dressed in something that would pass the scrutiny of elite expectations, a world away from my quiet evenings of tomato seedlings and old coffee mugs. I leaned back in the creaky desk chair Martha had bought at a garage sale 15 years ago, a chair that had witnessed more birthdays, Christmases, and family arguments than most could imagine. My gaze fell on my notebook open to a page that now carried two very different conversations in neat black ink. Small dinner closest people, yesterday's hopeful entry. Grand celebration, elite place, today's reality. Small dinner or grand celebration, closest people, or 50 guests, Seth's tired, hesitant voice, or Mabel's commanding, decisive tone. Through the kitchen window, my neighbor's sprinkler system clicked on, sending arcs of water across their manicured lawn. The sound was soothing, mundane, yet it contrasted sharply with the tension knotting my chest. I thought about my savings account, about the decent shirt hanging in my closet, about whether either would be enough to navigate this rarefied world. Perhaps the flower shop on Ashland Avenue could suggest something appropriate, roses maybe, or one of those elaborate arrangements businesswomen like to display in their offices, a subtle gesture of thoughtfulness that could make me seem like I belonged. I circled Thursday's date again in my notebook, adding the details I had been rehearsing in my head, 7:00 p.m., Lakeview Manor. The letters felt too small, too deliberate, and yet I needed them to anchor me in a world that felt impossibly grand. I picked up the phone and called the restaurant, listening carefully to the hostess's sophisticated clipped voice. As she explained valet and jacket requirements, her tone a gentle reminder of how far removed I felt from this life. After hanging up, I held the notebook with both hands, staring at the address I had written in careful block letters. The evening shadows crept slowly across the living room, stretching long fingers across the furniture, as if the darkness itself was conspiring to make me doubt my place in the world. Lakeview Manor's address stared back at me, elegant and expensive, a monument to sophistication I had never navigated before. I reached for the photo album on the coffee table, letting it fall open to Grace's school Christmas program from 2 years ago. She had been dressed as an angel costume, crooked wings sliding off one shoulder, yet her smile could have lit the entire auditorium. I remembered buying her a new shirt for the performance, practicing compliments about her singing voice in the mirror, trying to sound confident, proud like any father would. Then, as if a ghost from that December afternoon had returned to haunt me, I remembered Mabel's call. "Sorry, Reuben, venue change. The family section is completely full now." The memory tugged at me, sharp and insistent, reminding me how long I'd been navigating the margins of my grandchildren's lives. I closed my eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "This Thursday, I will be ready." You understand, I'd driven there anyway, just like I had 100 times in my mind, and now in reality too. Parked my old sedan across the street from Lincoln Elementary, letting the engine idle as I watched through those tall, gleaming windows. My granddaughter was on stage, tiny voice trembling, yet determined, singing Silent Night to a room full of parents and grandparents. Everyone, it seemed, but me. My chest tightened, the memory of all those missed moments pressing down like a weight I couldn't lift. Page after page of my photo albums held similar memories, echoes of laughter I hadn't heard firsthand. Simon's baseball game last spring, weather looked bad, Reuben Seth had warned. Rain might ruin it for everyone, he'd said. But then just a week later, Seth's Facebook photos betrayed the truth. Sunny skies, Simon sliding into home plate, while grandparents cheered from the bleachers. And I had been absent. Again. The kitchen timer chimed, yanking me back to my own small, quiet apartment. My soup was ready, I shuffled over to the stove, stirring the chicken noodle from a can, the radio playing old songs from the 70s. Martha's voice, sweet and faint, seemed to hum along in memory. She had sung while preparing real dinners, roasts and casseroles that filled the house with warmth that lingered in the air long after the meal was gone. Back in my chair, balancing the bowl on my knee, I turned another page in the album. Last Christmas morning, the one that hurt the most stared back at me. I had wrapped presents weeks in advance, planning every detail with care. A remote control helicopter for Simon Art Supplies, for Grace Professional wrapping paper bows, perfectly curled little name tags in my neatest handwriting. And yet the kids woke up sick fevers burning their little faces. Flu season, Reuben. You know how it spreads. I'd whispered that excuse to myself to soften the blow. Those presents still sat in my bedroom closet. I imagined the helicopter's batteries corroded useless. Grace's watercolors probably dried into a solid sheet of disappointment. Then 3 days later, Seth posted pictures from Vail. Both kids, healthy and laughing, building snowmen in designer ski jackets I couldn't afford in 5 years of Social Security checks. We lived in the same city, just 23 minutes apart by car, yet our lives never overlapped unless Mabel decreed it so. I had timed it once, driving past their subdivision just to see the house where my grandchildren grew up, a place that should have felt familiar, comforting, but always seemed like foreign territory. I saw them twice a year at most, always on Mabel's terms, always when convenient for her. The pattern was there, stark as daylight, if I let myself see it. Every invitation withdrawn, every plan suddenly changed, every maybe next time that never came. Maybe she just didn't want an old man, slow and sentimental, messing with the perfection she had built around her children. I closed the album slowly, but kept Grace's school photo tucked in my notebook. Tomorrow I'd need to shop for something appropriate, something substantial enough to fit into Lakeview Manor's elite, polished atmosphere. The mall had jewelry stores, perfume counters, with those tall, gleaming bottles wrapped in pristine boxes. I'd need to pick carefully. Every detail mattered. The radio hummed "The Way You Look Tonight," and for a moment I could almost hear Martha's soft voice joining the melody from the kitchen, guiding me, grounding me. She had always known how to handle difficult people, how to find common ground where I only saw walls. "This time will be different," I whispered aloud to her empty chair, letting the words settle around me. She invited me personally. That has to mean something. The album slipped back onto the coffee table with a soft thud, as if acknowledging my promise. Outside, streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Mrs. Patterson's television glowed faintly through her curtains, another normal family having their ordinary evening. Laughter, grandparents included without question or condition. For one brief moment I imagined that this could be mine too, that maybe Thursday would finally allow me inside the world that had seemed so far away for so long. I carried my empty soup bowl back to the kitchen, feeling its warmth already faded, rinsed it carefully under the faucet, and placed it in the drying rack, listening to the faint drip of water echoing in the quiet apartment. Every motion felt deliberate, like a rehearsal for the small but important steps I was about to take. Then I headed upstairs to my bedroom, where my one good shirt hung neatly in the closet next to the work clothes I no longer needed. Shirts worn for engines grease, and long days that had passed into memory. Tomorrow I reminded myself I'd buy flowers and carry hope along with them. Thursday I'd dress appropriately, step into Lakeview Manor, and try not to disappoint the grandchildren who barely remembered my name, but whose smiles I had etched into my heart. Thursday morning arrived quietly, pale sunlight spilling through the bedroom curtains, painting soft lines across the floor. I had been awake since 5:30, listening to the gentle hum of my old radio, while checking the weather forecast, each word a tiny reassurance. Clear skies, mild temperature, perfect for the drive to Lakeview Manor. The world outside my window seemed to hold its breath with me. After a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, I spread my handwritten notes across the kitchen table. Gift ideas, scarf jewelry, perfume. Each word carefully underlined, circled as if giving it weight beyond mere ink. Martha always said scarves made women feel elegant, graceful. I thought back to last year's Easter dinner, vaguely remembering Mabel in a soft shade of blue. Perhaps a scarf that echoed that memory would speak without words. Woodfield Mall opened at 10 Sherwood Road, but I arrived early, circling the massive parking lot twice before finally finding a space near the entrance. Families streamed past me, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers laughing in groups, elderly couples walking arm in arm, each absorbed in their own ordinary lives. I felt like an intruder in their rhythm, a quiet observer of normalcy I hadn't felt in years. Inside the mall, the noise hit me immediately. Conversations bounced off high ceilings, children cried cash, registers rang without end, and department stores stretched in every direction, their bright displays promising happiness through purchase. I wandered through Macy's first, running my fingers over handbags that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The saleswoman watched me, her perfectly painted nails tapping against the glass counter. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her smile polite but rehearsed. "I'm looking for a birthday gift for my daughter-in-law," I said carefully. "What's your price range?" I hesitated, running numbers through my head. Pension checks, the cost of the restaurant, the gap between wanting to give something meaningful and the reality of my bank account. Something nice, but not too expensive. Her smile dimmed and she led me toward a selection of cheaper accessories. I spent 30 long minutes examining wallets, costume jewelry, things that seemed precious only to those who didn't know the luxury of Lakeview Manor. Nothing felt right. My hands hovered over items I couldn't justify. Disappointed, I moved on to a boutique on the second floor, its soft lighting and classical music promising an oasis of calm. Silk scarves were arranged like artwork on wooden displays. A younger woman approached, her eyes warm with genuine kindness. "This silk scarf is very elegant, sir," she said, holding up a piece in a soft flowing blue. The fabric seemed alive, moving like water between her fingers. I imagined Mabel wearing it, the soft color complementing her presence, the gesture speaking of thoughtfulness without words. The price tag made me wince, but I thought of Grace's crooked angel costume, Simon's proud little league trophy, the missed Christmas mornings, the empty Easter dinners. I hope she'll like it. This was for her birthday. It was more than a gift. It was a bridge, a small attempt at connection. "Would you like special gift wrapping?" the young woman asked. "Yes. Please make it look nice," I replied, and watched as she folded tissue paper with careful precision, tied ribbon in perfect bows, transforming my modest purchase into something that gleamed with intention. It looked expensive, professional, unlike my amateur Christmas wrappings that had gone unopened year after year. Back home, I laid out my navy suit on the bed, checking each seam, each collar, smoothing it carefully. My one chance to make a good impression. The shirt, crisp and clean, reminded me of better days, of respect earned, of a presence worth noticing. I ran my hands over it again, making sure it was perfect. Thursday was coming, and with it a small chance to be remembered, to step back into the lives of my grandchildren in a way that mattered. The pants were slightly short, the jacket a bit loose across the shoulders, but it was clean and neatly pressed, the fabric smelling faintly of starch and diligence. My dress shoes gleamed after 15 meticulous minutes of polishing each stroke, a quiet reminder that tonight had to be different. In the bathroom mirror, I practiced the lines I might say to my grandchildren. "Hi, Simon. How's school going, Grace? You've gotten so tall." The words felt awkward, rusty, foreign on my tongue, unused after years of speaking mostly to adults, to peers, to coworkers. Speaking to someone under 30 carried its own strange weight. The gift waited on my kitchen table, wrapped in silver paper and tied with a perfectly symmetrical blue bow. Elegant enough for Lakeview Manor, costly enough to show that I cared, and subtle enough not to draw embarrassment or pity. I glanced at the clock, 5:45. Soon it would be time. I grabbed my car keys and wallet, double-checked the printed restaurant address, and made my way toward the garage. Tonight I would see Simon and Grace again. Tonight I would try to reclaim a piece of the life that had felt so far out of reach. The garage door rumbled as it lifted, and I guided my old Buick onto the driveway, the fading sunlight glinting off its worn hood. The gift rode on the passenger seat, silver paper catching the fleeting reflections of streetlights like a tiny beacon of hope. 6 Surreal on the dot. Perfect timing for a 7-hour reservation. I took a deep breath, fingers tightening around the steering wheel. For the first time in months, the drive ahead felt like a bridge instead of a road lined with hesitation and distance. I-90 stretched forward like a ribbon, cutting through suburban neighborhoods, past strip malls and neatly trimmed lawns, leading toward the open countryside and eventually Lakeview Manor. The radio played Martha's favorite oldies, and I found myself humming along, letting Moon River wash over me. That song had been our wedding dance, a memory both sweet and painful, but grounding me in the person I had been and the person I needed to be tonight. At a red light, I checked the directions one more time. 23 miles outside the city overlooking Lake Michigan's southern shore. Elite dining, elegant atmosphere, and a gift substantial enough to convey sincerity. The suburbs slowly gave way to farmland traffic, thinning to a ribbon of quiet. Rolling fields stretched toward the horizon, broken only by farmhouses with warm kitchen lights glowing inside. Families gathered around tables, grandparents smiling at grandchildren, the image striking a pang in my chest. A life so ordinary yet so distant from me these past months. 6:15 on the dashboard clock, and a movement caught my eye. A car stood by the side of the road, hood up, hazard lights blinking. A woman dark-haired and dressed simply stood beside it, posture rigid with frustration. Despite her distress, she carried an air of dignity. My first instinct urged me to drive past. I was late, wearing my best suit, carrying an expensive gift, already burdened with worry about appearances. But 40 years of fixing engines had trained my eyes to recognize automotive despair. My conscience would not allow me to abandon someone in need. I eased my Buick to a stop behind her car and approached with the cautious deliberation of someone offering help to a stranger. "Ma'am, do you need assistance?" I asked. Her face transformed, relief flooding features that had moments before been tight with worry. "Oh, thank goodness. I don't know what's wrong. It just stopped running." Her voice was calm, yet carried authority, a quiet strength beneath the stress, betraying a life accustomed to solving problems, even when others failed. I opened the hood and peered inside. The engine compartment spoke plainly. Battery terminals, corroded, voltage reading, zero, alternator belt, intact but useless without power. A classic failure pattern, one I had seen thousands of times in my workshop days. The smell of grease, metal, and engine oil brought back the tactile comfort of my life's work, the rhythm of solving mechanical problems, step by step. "This is something we can fix," I said quietly, already rolling up my sleeves in thought. The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer now, gratitude threaded with exhaustion. I smiled faintly, thinking of my own late arrival at Lakeview Manor, my own mission tonight to repair something just as delicate, though the stakes were different, involving hearts instead of engines, family instead of machines. "Looks like your battery's dead," I said, crouching beside the open hood. "Probably been weakening for weeks. Finally gave up today. Can you fix it?" Her eyes widened slightly, but there was no trace of panic, only a calm curiosity, the kind that suggested she wasn't expecting a man to swoop in and save the day. She had jumper cables in her trunk. "This shouldn't take long," I added, more to steady my own nerves than hers. She watched me work with keen interest, leaning slightly against the fender, dark hair brushing her shoulders, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "You're very kind to stop. Most people just drive by," she said, her voice carrying neither judgment nor pity, just honest appreciation. I connected the cables with practiced precision, red to positive, black to negative hands guided by years of muscle memory. I thought of Martha, my late wife, and the way she had always insisted that helping strangers wasn't charity, it was just good sense. "Never know when you might need help yourself," she'd said. The engine turned over smoothly on the second try, the familiar hum of mechanical life washing over me like a small triumph. I let it idle, checking voltage levels to ensure the alternator would recharge the battery properly. Professional pride demanded thoroughness, even for roadside fixes. "There you go. Should work fine now," I said, stepping back. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, the question catching me off guard. Payment had never crossed my mind. Helping people, good, decent people, wasn't about money. I smiled faintly. "Nothing at all, ma'am. Just be careful on these highways." She nodded, concern threading her expression. "I will," she promised. I was already packing the cable's, eyes on the road clock in the distance. 6:30. Definitely running late for Lakeview Manor. The grandchildren would be wondering where Grandpa was. "Where are you headed this evening?" she asked, curiosity clear in her voice, not intrusive, just genuine. "To my daughter-in-law's birthday party," I replied, my tone matter of fact, though I couldn't quite hide a flicker of guilt at being late. Her expression shifted for a fraction of a second. Was it amusement, recognition, or something else I couldn't tell? Well, I hope you have a wonderful time. Maybe we'll see each other again. Maybe I said. Drive safely now, she added, climbing back into her car. I watched through the rearview mirror as her taillights curved away, disappearing into the distance. There was a grace to her, a composure, even in the midst of car trouble, the kind of strength Martha would have recognized and admired. By the time I reached Lakeview Manor, it was 7:05. Late, yes, but not disastrously so. I wound the jumper cables into neat coils, the familiar smell of motor oil and rubber grounding me. Her engine purred like new machinery, each note of smooth combustion, a reminder of years spent diagnosing and repairing of hands that knew the language of metal and wire. Test your light's radio air conditioning. I suggested, wiping grease from my hands with the rag I always kept in my trunk. Make sure everything's working properly. She followed my instructions with care, methodical and attentive, checking each system as if she understood the stakes. Interior lights, headlights turned signals. Windshield wipers all functioned perfectly. She smiled, a small but genuine curve of satisfaction. Perfect, I said. And in that moment, watching her drive off into the evening, I realized that sometimes even small acts of help, small choices to stop and lend a hand, could ripple far beyond a broken battery. They could remind a man why kindness mattered, why it was worth every second of effort, and why sometimes life had a way of rewarding decency when it was least expected. You've saved my evening, she said, stepping out of her car with a visible sigh of relief. Her posture relaxed, shoulders dropping, as though a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying had been lifted. Now, what do I owe you for the repair? The question felt strange to me, almost absurd. I shook my head gently, closing the hood with careful hands. Ma'am, nothing at all. This is just what neighbors do for each other. She paused, tilting her head slightly, her voice soft but insistent. But you're not my neighbor. You're a complete stranger. And yet, you stopped when dozens of other cars drove past. Surely I can pay you something for your time. I met her gaze and shook my head firmly. My wife Martha always said that kindness isn't a business transaction. You'd do the same for someone else, I'm sure. A knowing, almost conspiratorial smile played across her lips. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and amusement, that made me feel a little lighter despite the evening looming ahead. She gestured toward my watch. Where did you say you were going tonight? I cleared my throat, adjusting my tie self-consciously. My daughter-in-law's birthday celebration, Lakeview Manor Restaurant. I glanced down at the dashboard clock. 6:45. Definitely later than I'd hoped. Her smile widened, though I couldn't quite place its meaning. Lakeview Manor, quite an elegant establishment. Yes, I admitted. Supposed to be very fancy. Elite dining, my daughter-in-law called it. My fingers nervously fidgeted with the knot of my tie. I hope my suit's appropriate for their standards. She looked at me with quiet confidence, as if reassuring me without saying it outright. I'm sure you'll fit in perfectly. Her gaze held a sparkle that made me feel seen, not just as a random passerby, but as someone who mattered even for a brief moment in time. She walked back to her car but paused, hand resting lightly on the door handle, as if weighing whether to say something more. You know, it's interesting how life brings people together at exactly the right moment. I tilted my head, curiosity nudging me. How do you mean? Oh, just that sometimes strangers meet for reasons that only become clear later. Her voice was soft, melodic, with a hint of mischief. Maybe we'll see each other again sooner than you think. I chuckled politely, unsure how to respond. Maybe so, but I doubt it. Chicago's a big city. Smaller than you might imagine, she countered, sliding into her driver's seat and lowering the window. Thank you again for your kindness. Have a wonderful evening with your family. Drive carefully now and get that battery checked at a service station soon. I nodded, returning her wave as her taillights disappeared around the bend. Nice encounter, I thought, the kind that restores faith in human decency. Martha would have approved. I climbed behind my steering wheel, glancing at the dashboard clock, 6:55. Definitely late, but not disastrously so. I pressed the accelerator a little harder, eager to reach Lakeview Manor, before my absence became noticeable. Her words replayed in my mind like a melody I couldn't shake. Maybe we'll see each other again sooner than you think. Odd thing to say to a complete stranger, but some people seem to live in a world where coincidences weren't random, where moments of kindness carried the weight of fate. As the city streets gave way to suburban avenues, my thoughts drifted forward to the evening ahead. Simon and Grace probably dressed in their Sunday best, waiting for a grandfather they barely remembered. Seth fumbling through polite conversation while Mabel orchestrated her perfect birthday celebration with meticulous precision, and me arriving a little late with a simple silk scarf in my pocket, trying not to disappoint the grandchildren I loved more than anything. The evening promised elegance, discomfort, and maybe if luck held a few small moments of connection that might start to bridge the long gap of absence. I arrived with the gift carefully wrapped in silver paper, the blue ribbon tied in a bow, just as the boutique had done, and a heart full of genuine enthusiasm. Determined to be the grandfather Simon and Grace deserved, I gripped the box tightly as the GPS announced my destination in half a mile. Through the dark trees, the lights of Lakeview Manor shimmered across the lake, warm and inviting against the night sky. Valet parking, just as the hostess had instructed, awaited me. I exhaled, adjusted my tie one last time, and stepped out of the car ready to give my grandchildren the birthday celebration their grandmother would have wanted them to remember. The entrance doors of Lakeview Manor gleamed like polished mirrors beneath crystal chandeliers, reflecting the soft glow of lanterns in the dark waters beyond. I paused, glancing into the car's side mirror one last time. Navy suit jacket, straightened hair combed as neatly as I could manage. Gift held with care, I reminded myself of Martha's advice. Walk in like you belong there. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms moved among the luxury vehicles, Mercedes, BMWs, and Lexuses, that cost more than my entire pension for the year. My old Buick looked humble by comparison, its faded paint and modest form standing out against the opulence. Yet when I handed over the keys, the young man offered the same professional courtesy he had extended to the sleek Porsche just ahead of me. A nod, a polite smile, and he tucked the keys away, the gesture small but affirming. Inside, live piano music floated through the air, mingling with the subtle perfume of fresh flowers. White tablecloths stretched across the tables, silver cutlery glinted under soft lights, and crystal wine glasses caught reflections from the chandeliers above. Everything was elegant, refined, perfect, the elite dining Mabel had promised. And then I saw them, the crowd. 50, maybe 60 people mingling throughout the spacious hall. Business suits, cocktail dresses, champagne glasses raised in polite toasts. Conversations about quarterly projections, market trends, and client meetings swirled around me. Professional networking, not a birthday celebration. This wasn't Seth's small dinner with the closest family. This was a grand spectacle, and I felt a small pang of uncertainty. Mabel stood near the bar, radiant in a black designer dress, her hair perfect, her posture confident. She gestured expressively while three impeccably dressed men hung on her every word. She had become a powerhouse, an environmental consulting success story, holding court among potential clients and business partners. I approached slowly, my steps careful, the gift feeling suddenly inadequate in my hands. Sorry I'm late, I said, interrupting her conversation with as much warmth as I could muster. I had to help someone on the highway with car trouble. Her expression froze for a heartbeat, icy and measured. The businessmen around her glanced at me with polite curiosity, taking in my modest suit, my working-class appearance, my obvious difference from this world of champagne and silk. Reuben, she said, her voice carrying a cool sharpness, almost like ice crystals in midair. What a surprise. I offered the wrapped gift with genuine hope, the small box feeling heavier than it was in my hands. Happy birthday, Mabel. I hope you like it. She accepted it as if the package might somehow tarnish her perfectly manicured hands, setting it quickly on a nearby side table without a word of acknowledgement. The businessmen exchanged subtle glances, reading the social cues I was only beginning to understand. Thank you, she said dismissively, already turning back to her conversation partners. Gentlemen, as I was saying about sustainable energy initiatives, I hesitated a moment, the room spinning slightly, then gathered courage and asked quietly, Mabel, where should I sit? I'd love to see Simon and Grace. For a brief second, her eyes flicked to me, perhaps registering the sincerity in my tone. the longing to connect with the grandchildren she so carefully shielded from my visits. Then almost imperceptibly, a hint of acknowledgement softened her expression. I held my breath, heart pounding, waiting to see if the moment might tip in my favor for the children, for me, for the memory of Martha, and for the small hope that family could still find its way back into the celebration. Another frozen moment passed, the kind that stretched time in strange, painful ways. I could see it in her eyes, Mabel's carefully measured calculations, each thought weighing professional image against family obligation. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a mask of composure hiding the private amusement or maybe annoyance behind it. "Oh, dear Reuben. What a shame," she said, voice light and almost teasing, the words slicing through the air. "All the seats at the main table are completely reserved." She tilted her hand toward the corner of the room, graceful and deliberate, as though directing me to exile. "You'll have to sit over there, with the service team." I followed her gesture and stopped in front of a card table pushed into the corner, its surface bare no tablecloth, no place settings, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Around it, waiters and busboys nibbled at sandwiches or sipped soda between serving duties. A small, quiet island of humility and invisibility. I was expected to be invisible, and I understood perfectly. "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but the reservation was finalized weeks ago," one young waiter muttered politely, shrugging, letting the unspoken implication linger like perfume. "We simply didn't plan for—" She trailed off, leaving the rest to hang in the air, heavy with implication. I glanced across the room toward the main table. Simon and Grace sat there, dressed in their finest clothes, polished shoes, hair neatly combed, their tiny hands holding forks like delicate instruments. Too far away to reach, too young to understand why Grandpa had been exiled to the corner. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't an accident, a simple oversight, or poor planning. This was deliberate. The invitation, the elite venue, the strategic positioning, all carefully orchestrated. I swallowed, feeling the sting of humiliation, but keeping my dignity intact. Around me, the businessmen at nearby tables sipped wine, adjusted cufflinks, and cast glances in our direction. Curiosity mingled with discomfort. A few whispered quietly among themselves, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch the unfolding scene. The subtle hum of conversations dimmed, like the room itself had paused to watch the awkward tableau. Seth stood at the far end of the bar, amber liquid catching the light of crystal bottles lined in mirrored shelves behind him. Designer suit, sharp hair, perfectly styled, he looked every bit the successful young man I had hoped he would become when he was a boy. The good job, the nice clothes, the financial security I had dreamed for him, they were all here. And yet his presence carried tension, a silent question of loyalty, of allegiance. He saw me approaching, and his shoulders stiffened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face like a newspaper headline. The man who had grown up under my guidance, who knew better, was caught in the web of his own hesitation. I lowered my voice, careful not to add spectacle to the theater of humiliation. "Son," I said quietly, controlled even, "maybe there's room at your table. Just for tonight." He couldn't meet my eyes. His gaze stayed fixed on the swirling ice cubes floating in his drink, each movement of glass mirrored in the crystal behind him, repeating our confrontation infinitely. Then after a long pause, he lifted his head, conflicted emotions battling in his expression. "Dad, listen," he began, voice low, hesitant. "The thing is, we booked all the reservations before deciding to invite you. Mabel, she had the seating chart finalized weeks ago." I nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of his words, the cold, deliberate planning that had placed me among the busboys and waiters. Yes, I was sitting at a card table in the corner, excluded from the celebration that had been promised as a family gathering. And yet beneath the sting, I felt something solid in my chest, the resolve to rise above this humiliation, to focus on the children, to carry on, with the grace Martha would have wanted me to keep. "It's not that bad," Seth muttered, voice tight, trying to rationalize what was happening, but I could feel the weight of every word. 50 feet separated me from my grandchildren, Simon and Grace, and I couldn't even move closer. My voice stayed level, measured, but each syllable carried the weight of decades of love, patience, and long-suppressed disappointment. "This is your wife's birthday party," I said, slowly letting each word land, "and she's treating their grandfather like hired help." Seth's face flushed crimson, but not with anger. No, this was something more acute. Embarrassment, shame, the kind of discomfort that comes from recognizing your complicity in something fundamentally wrong. I could almost see the internal calculations behind his eyes, the conflict of loyalty, pride, and conscience warring within him. Maybe I could ask Mabel to rearrange. Would you? My words weren't accusatory, just calm observation, but the question hovered in the perfumed, chandelier-lit air between us. Would you actually ask your wife to treat your father with basic dignity? Silence stretched like a taut rope between us. The piano played on its elegant melody floating over the room, barely touching the tension. Crystal glasses clinked at nearby tables, laughter and conversation flowing like water around stones, oblivious to the quiet moral battlefield unfolding at the bar. She's worked really hard on this party, Dad Seth said, finally his voice small, almost pleading. All her business contacts, she's stressed about making good impressions. I nodded slowly, understanding exactly what he meant and exactly what it didn't excuse. I understand, I said. Two simple words carrying 42 years of disappointment, missed birthdays, forgotten anniversaries, and subtle slights that had stacked over time. Two words that said everything about his priorities, his choices, his willingness to put social climbing above family. I could see Seth's relief ripple across his face. He'd expected confrontation, maybe a demand, perhaps even a fatherly explosion of indignation. Instead, I gave him what he wanted, silent, unspoken permission to abandon me without consequence. It's just for tonight, he said weakly, barely meeting my eyes. Maybe next time we can. Next time, I interrupted softly, turning away from the bar, letting the words settle like a stone in his chest. Sure, son. Next time. Behind me, I heard him calling after me, offering justifications, hoping to ease his conscience with carefully chosen phrases about difficult situations, and the hope that I'd still enjoy the dinner. Words meant to soothe him, not to fix the problem. I walked slowly toward the corner table, my steps echoing in the grand hall past guests discussing stock portfolios, exotic vacations and career triumphs, past Mabel holding court among her business allies, past the main table where Simon and Grace sat in their Sunday best, their eyes flicking toward me with confusion and subtle sadness. Too young to understand why Grandpa was banished to the edge of the room. The staff table felt like exile, but there was something grounding about it. The waiters nodded sympathetically as I lowered myself into the stiff chair, offering solidarity I hadn't felt from my own blood in years. They asked if I wanted coffee, offered me water, treated me with more courtesy than the people ostensibly bound to me by family. From this corner, I could watch everything, the entire orchestration of exclusion, the social choreography, the painfully calculated distance. I began counting the guests quietly to occupy my mind, 57 by my calculation. I watched Mabel network with her industry leader Seth hovering nervously near the bar, stealing glances that avoided confrontation. And most painfully, I observed my grandchildren Simon and Grace attempting to glance toward me, constrained by protocol, caught between desire and obedience. They could not approach, could not cross the invisible barriers erected by decorum and pretense. I rested my hands on the table, letting the quiet observation settle over me. This was the celebration they wanted, elegant, elite, and utterly devoid of the warmth that should have been the heart of the evening. Yet in that corner among those who understood dignity and kindness without question, I felt a quiet resilience taking root. I could see it in the children's eyes, the fleeting glances, the recognition of Grandpa in their midst. And I knew that no matter the calculated cruelty of adults, the bond with these grandchildren was stronger than any social pretense, more enduring than any orchestrated seating chart. The staff table felt like an observation post perched at the edge of enemy territory. From this corner, I could survey the battlefield with chilling clarity. 57 guests by my count, all in designer clothing, each perfectly groomed, perfectly poised, fully immersed in Mabel's meticulously curated world of environmental consulting, networking, and social maneuvering. The contrast was brutal. Here I was, Reuben grandfather, exiled to the edge, sharing a card table with those who served the very people treating me like a stranger in my own family. Sorry you ended up here, sir, said a young waiter sliding onto the bench across from me, a sandwich and coffee cup in hand, his voice carrying genuine sympathy. Doesn't seem right, I said quietly. Family treating family like this. He shook his head slowly, eyes flicking toward the main dining room, catching snippets of conversations I could barely hear over the piano music. Not your fault, sir. Been working these fancy parties for 3 years. Never seen anything like this before. Neither had I. But the patterns were becoming painfully clear. Systematic exclusion dressed up in the elegant trappings of social necessity. Seth's modest family gathering had been absorbed into Mabel's professional networking event with precise, almost military precision. The intention behind every decision crystal clear: the grandfather must be kept at a distance, visible, but not participating. I began counting backwards through memories, tracing the same invisible hand at work over years. Christmas morning cancellations, school play, venue changes, baseball game, weather excuses, Easter dinner, stomach bugs. Each story, each minor inconvenience had been designed to separate me from Simon and Grace without creating overt confrontation, a masterclass in plausible deniability. The arithmetic was simple. 57 business guests received carefully calculated invitations. The grandfather received a seat in exile among the service staff. My phone buzzed, pulling me from these thoughts. A text message. Likely Seth sending digital apologies to ease his conscience, but the number was unfamiliar. Is everything all right at the restaurant? I hope your evening improved after our highway encounter. Her name flashed on the screen: E, the woman from the roadside, the one whose car I had repaired just hours earlier, the one who had unexpectedly entered my night and reminded me that decency existed in the world. Somehow she had my number, probably through the insurance company, yet the gesture felt profoundly personal. A reminder that strangers could sometimes act with more concern than those closest to you. I typed slowly, carefully choosing each word. Interesting evening. Thank you for asking. Her reply was immediate, crisp, and strangely prophetic. Sometimes the most interesting evenings lead to unexpected opportunities. I smiled faintly at the screen, shaking my head. Odd words for an evening defined by humiliation and exclusion. But then again, everything about tonight defied normal family logic. Across the room, Grace spotted me. Her small hand lifted in a shy, hopeful wave. Instantly, Mabel's polished hand descended on her shoulder, guiding her back to the adult conversation, redirecting attention, like a conductor controlling a symphony of appearances. Simon followed his sister's gaze and caught sight of me sitting at the corner table, his young face scrunched in confusion. He wanted to cross the invisible boundary, to run to me, to climb into my lap, to show me his projects, and tell me about school, to hand over quarters for the vintage arcade games I had glimpsed near the restaurant entrance. But the social hierarchy, meticulously enforced, held them captive at the main table, while I remained in exile, close enough to see their longing, far enough away to feel the sting of my position in this family's carefully orchestrated world. 57 guests. I muttered the number under my breath, savoring the bitter symmetry of it all. The waiter looked up from his sandwich. "What's that, sir?" "Just thinking out loud," I said softly, eyes returning to the main room voice carrying more weight than the simple word suggested. About truth lies, and the difference between them. For the first time, the calculation of decades became visible in the room. Patterns revealed. Exclusion deliberate. Yet in that corner, surrounded by simple gestures of human decency from those who understood it instinctively, I found a quiet strength settling in. Observing did not mean surrendering. Witnessing did not mean I had lost. And in that moment, I knew that the children were watching too, learning the measure of courage, the depth of love, and the resilience of a grandfather who refused to be invisible. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the mysterious E. "The evening isn't over yet. Sometimes the best surprises come last." I held the phone in both hands, staring at the screen as if it might whisper secrets beyond mere words. How could a complete stranger sound so certain about the course of my night? But then nothing about tonight had followed predictable patterns. From the humiliating seating to Mabel's meticulously orchestrated social domination, the evening had already defied all logic. Perhaps this stranger, this woman from the highway, had a plan of her own. Across the room, the restaurant doors opened with a dramatic flourish. Heads turned immediately, conversations faltering mid-sentence. The valet staff stiffened, the polished shoes of the maître d' pausing on the marble floor. I looked up from my phone, squinting against the dim golden lighting of Lakeview Manor, trying to make sense of the sudden stir. Double doors swept open like theater curtains, announcing the entrance of a guest who seemed to command the air itself. Elegant, statuesque, moving with a quiet authority that drew every eye. Her entourage followed, carefully orchestrated, yet effortless, demanding immediate attention from everyone from the valet attendants to the restaurant staff, even the mingling business elites who had paused mid-toast to take her measure. She stepped inside like the final act of a well-rehearsed play, her presence reshaping the energy of the room, as if gravity itself shifted toward her. A deep emerald green designer dress hugged her figure with flawless sophistication. Diamond earrings caught the chandelier light in flashes like distant stars illuminating her path. Every step she took was precise, deliberate, yet completely natural. She did not speak, and yet the room seemed to listen. Two professional security guards flanked her, scanning the room for potential disruptions, while maintaining a discreet, respectful distance. Recognition struck me like a bolt of lightning. The woman from the highway, the stranded motorist whose battery I had jump-started less than 2 hours ago, was here. But this wasn't the same person I had helped roadside. Gone were the casual clothes, the vulnerable posture, the slight hesitancy in her voice. In their place stood someone larger than life, someone whose presence alone redefined the room. She was power and grace incarnate, effortlessly claiming the attention of 57 people without uttering a word. Whispers rippled across nearby tables. "Who is that?" asked a hushed voice. "Must be someone important," came the reply like gospel. Across the room, Mabel's expression betrayed her panic in three rapid stages. Pale shock, flushed crimson, then a frozen forced smile, the exact mask worn during high-stakes business negotiations, when the outcome teetered on her control. Mabel abandoned her conversation partners, entirely rushing toward the entrance, with a nervous energy that betrayed both desperation and calculation. "Ms. Howard, what an unexpected pleasure," Mabel said, her voice pitched higher than usual, trembling with the anxiety of someone suddenly confronted with forces beyond their command. Howard. The name meant nothing to me personally, but in the restaurant, it was as if the syllable itself carried weight, summoning respect and deference. The elegant woman smiled politely, yet distantly, a professional courtesy, devoid of warmth, acknowledgement, without subservience, interaction without compromise. "Good evening, Mabel. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by," she said smoothly. Her voice calm, measured yet holding an unmistakable edge of authority. Her eyes swept the dining hall with a deliberate, calculated grace, decorations, crystal stemware, the soft hum of networking conversations, all cataloged, assessed, yet nothing unsettled her. Then slowly her gaze found me. Corner table, staff table, my modest presence amid waiters and busboys. Her eyes softened. The corners of her mouth lifted in a genuine smile for the first time since entering the room. Recognition, connection, gratitude. For the first time tonight, someone in this world, someone entirely unexpected, saw me. And just like that, the impossible became tangible. The quiet observer at the edge of a family spectacle, the grandfather left in exile, suddenly mattered. She didn't speak, didn't approach immediately, but the message was clear. She knew. She remembered. And for the first time this evening, hope sparked quietly in the pit of my chest. "I told you we might see each other again," she said, her voice calm, but carrying that quiet certainty that had startled me earlier. Her words traveled across the dining hall like a subtle current, drawing attention without any need for volume. All around, the chatter paused for just a fraction of a second, guests following the line of her gaze. Their eyes landed on me, the old man, sitting awkwardly among restaurant workers at the corner table. Mabel froze, caught mid-conversation, her perfectly poised facade beginning to crumble. Her eyes darted between Ms. Howard and me, trying to make sense of what she was witnessing. Calculations, strategies, social maneuverings. Nothing in her careful planning accounted for this. Her carefully curated hierarchy, the elite seating arrangements, the subtle exclusion of a grandfather from his own grandchildren's celebration, it all seemed to collapse under the weight of a single presence. "I believe we have business to discuss," Ms. Howard said smoothly, addressing Mabel without skipping a beat. But she didn't pause. Her steps were already taking her toward my table. The crowd instinctively parted as if the laws of etiquette themselves had been rewritten to accommodate her movement. Every guest, from the well-dressed business leaders to families sipping champagne, suddenly felt the gravitational pull of her authority. Professional respect, natural and undeniable, radiated from her. Mabel's forced smile faltered as she trailed behind her social command, slipping through her fingers. The meticulously planned networking gala was now completely out of her control. The table assignments, the guest hierarchy, the carefully cultivated image of exclusivity, all rendered meaningless by this single unanticipated arrival. Ms. Howard approached my corner with purpose, every step deliberate, measured like someone moving through a chessboard, 3 moves ahead of everyone else. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, gesturing gracefully toward the empty chair beside me. Her voice carried neither condescension nor hesitation, only quiet authority. The distinction between staff table and main celebration, the boundary that had defined my entire evening, suddenly seemed irrelevant. The young waiter practically jumped from his chair, his awe evident. "Please, ma'am, take mine," he stammered. "That's very kind of you." "Thank you," Miss Howard said with a polite nod, settling elegantly into the chair. Her designer dress, rich in color and texture, seemed at home next to the simple metal chair, far more comfortable in presence and impact than the formal tables where Mabel's business guests clustered. Mabel arrived moments later, slightly breathless, her professional composure stretched tight across her face. "Ms. Howard, surely you'd prefer to sit at the main table." "I can arrange, actually." Ms. Howard interrupted gently, her voice soft, yet unwavering. "I'm quite curious about the seating arrangements here." The authority in her tone was unmistakable. Polite, deliberate, unassailable. "Why?" "Is Mr. Gray sitting with the restaurant staff?" Mabel's question carried more than curiosity. It was accusation, disbelief wrapped in silk. The words floated in the air, drawing nearby guests closer, hungry for drama, more riveting than any discussion about quarterly profits or environmental initiatives. "Well, you see," Mabel started, her laugh, fragile, forced, artificial. "It's a family matter, space limitations, last-minute reservations." Ms. Howard turned her gaze toward me with genuine interest, not condescension, not judgment, just curiosity and recognition. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time all evening, I felt seen, acknowledged, not as an afterthought, not as a relic of someone's social miscalculation, but as the grandfather I had always been, the man who had tried to show kindness on the highway, who had driven through doubt and discomfort just to be present. The room seemed to tilt slightly in that moment. Conversations had resumed in low whispers, but all eyes were still subtly drawn to the improbable duo, the elegantly commanding Ms. Howard and the solitary grandfather who had somehow, by virtue of honesty, humility, and simple decency, earned her notice. "You're related to tonight's hostess?" Ms. Howard asked, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the hum of conversation around us. "She's my daughter-in-law," I replied quietly, careful not to raise my voice, careful not to draw unnecessary attention. "It's her 40th birthday celebration, and I'm celebrating it at the staff table." The simple statement hung in the air like a striking chord, cutting through all of Mabel's carefully constructed defenses. Her elaborate explanations, her rehearsed excuses about seating charts and guest lists, fell flat. Social maneuvering could never mask the fundamental wrongness of this evening when stated so plainly. "The main table was booked weeks ago," Mabel said, desperation edging her voice. "Family seating was finalized before we decided to invite additional guests." Miss Howard raised a single eyebrow, subtle but charged with incredulity. "Additional guests?" "Well, yes," Mabel stammered. "Extended family members weren't originally included in the intimate celebration plans." Ms. Howard's eyes narrowed slightly, and the faintest crease appeared on her forehead. Two simple words I see carried more weight than any speech could: a quiet, razor-sharp judgment about character, fairness, and moral responsibility. Around us, the restaurant buzzed with low, curious murmurs. Guests whispered behind champagne glasses and silver cutlery, their attention drawn to this extraordinary interrogation unfolding at the corner table. "Tell me about your grandchildren," Ms. Howard said, turning her gaze fully toward me now, her tone deceptively casual. "I assume they are here tonight?" I nodded subtly toward the main table where Simon and Grace sat dressed in their Sunday best, stealing quick, hesitant glances at me. Social protocol and invisible barriers prevented them from approaching. "They look lovely," Ms. Howard continued, her voice warm, yet meticulously calculated. "When did you last spend time with them?" The question was phrased as small talk, but her eyes, sharp, analytical, betrayed the fact that she was conducting a careful investigation. "Christmas," I answered quietly. Before that, Easter. There always seemed to be scheduling conflicts or health concerns whenever family gatherings were planned. A pattern repeated with precision. Unfortunate pattern, she said, lightly observing Mabel's face as it drained of color, the professional mask cracking ever so slightly under scrutiny. Seth appeared at my side from the bar, drink in hand, clearly dispatched by his wife to manage whatever situation was developing. "Dad, everything okay here?" he asked cautiously. "Your father was just explaining family dynamics, Ms." Howard interjected smoothly, her tone polite but pointed, carrying the weight of someone whose opinion could alter reputations with a single glance. Interesting perspective on hospitality and respect for elders. Seth's face flushed a mix of embarrassment and reluctant awareness. He now understood, perhaps for the first time, that his family's treatment of me was being silently evaluated by someone whose judgment mattered far beyond this restaurant. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Mabel suggested, her voice trembling now, desperation seeping through every word. Ms. Howard stood slowly, deliberately, the movement commanding attention without aggression. The restaurant seemed to pause around her. Conversation stopped mid-flow. Glasses hovered in the air as if time itself had taken notice. "Actually," she said, calm but unmistakably authoritative, "I think it's time for a proper introduction." She walked toward the center of the dining hall. The room fell completely silent. Every one of the 57 guests, staff, and family members instinctively focused on her. Raising her champagne glass, she spoke with effortless clarity. "Good evening, everyone. Allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Esther Howard." A ripple ran through the crowd. Business cards lay forgotten. Carefully curated networking conversations evaporated. The room recognized, even before she continued, that this was someone with real power that could shift deals, contracts, and reputations in a heartbeat. "I'm the founder and CEO of Howard Green Energy Corporation," she continued. Gas flitted from table to table. The very mention of her company carried the weight of billions in assets, influence that could make or break consulting firms with a single decision. Mabel's face went ashen. "I am also the principal director of the Howard Foundation." Ms. Howard added, her smile, pleasant, professional, but utterly commanding. "We manage charitable assets exceeding $2 billion annually. Our focus is on supporting organizations and individuals who demonstrate exceptional character and human dignity." Every word landed like a gavel. The room, once a stage for social posturing, now felt charged with moral gravity. And for the first time that evening, I felt seen not as an embarrassment, not as a placeholder at a corner table, but as someone whose decency, patience, and quiet persistence deserved recognition. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled crowd like a thin layer of frost on a winter morning. Every head in the room turned, every eye fixed on the corner table, where I sat quietly among the staff, unnoticed until now. This evening, she began, her voice clear, resonant, yet somehow gentle. "I had the unusual pleasure of meeting Mr. Reuben Gray on the highway outside Chicago. My car had broken down, and this gentleman, without hesitation, stopped to help a complete stranger. He refused any payment for his assistance, demonstrating a level of decency and integrity that we rarely witness in the modern world." Her gaze swept across the room, warm and assured, before settling on me for a brief, affirming moment. Then she returned to the crowd, letting the pause build tension. "He told me he was attending his daughter-in-law's birthday celebration at this very restaurant." Imagine my astonishment when I discovered that the same man whose actions revealed courage and kindness was seated not at the family table, not beside his own grandchildren, but instead isolated at a corner table with restaurant staff, separated from the very children he loves at what was meant to be a family gathering. A hush fell over the room. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, champagne glasses poised in mid-air, silverware frozen between plate and hand. Mabel swayed slightly, gripping a nearby chair for support, her carefully constructed social facade beginning to crumble. "In my experience," Esther continued, her voice calm, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority, "I have learned that character matters far more than profit margins. How people treat others when they think no one important is watching reveals their true nature. It is not measured in contracts signed, in revenue generated, or in networking success. It is measured in kindness, empathy, and the courage to do what is right." She let the words linger for a heartbeat, then delivered the verdict with crystalline clarity. Unfortunately, what I have witnessed tonight regarding the treatment of Mr. Gray demonstrates a fundamental lack of the values my foundation upholds. Therefore, I am announcing that Howard Green Energy will not be pursuing any business relationships with Gray Environmental Consulting. Character and human decency are non-negotiable in all of our partnerships. The room seemed to shiver under the impact of her declaration. Gasps, whispers, and stunned looks rippled across the diners. Mabel's empire of meticulously cultivated contacts, her elaborate plans, her years of calculated networking, all collapsed in a single devastating sentence. 2 years of work, dozens of potential contracts, millions in projected revenue undone, because she had failed to show basic respect to the man who had shown nothing but honor and decency. Then her tone shifted warm and measured the gentle authority, softening into genuine admiration. However, she continued, her eyes returning to me with unmistakable approval. I am immensely pleased to announce that Mr. Reuben Gray has accepted my invitation to join the Howard Foundation's board of directors. His unwavering character, his innate dignity, and his natural capacity for compassion make him exactly the kind of person we need, guiding our charitable initiatives, shaping decisions, and exemplifying the principles we hold dear. The restaurant erupted. Murmurs of amazement, stunned laughter, and incredulous whispers filled the room. Seth's whiskey glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the polished marble floor. The clink of crystal punctuated the moment, a moment of complete and elegant reversal. From my corner table, I watched Simon's confused smile, Grace's wide eyes reflecting astonishment, and my son's face shifting from shame to dawning recognition of the catastrophic error he had participated in. The grandchildren's longing glances, previously restrained by invisible social rules, now lingered with hope and tentative joy. Esther Howard raised her champagne glass one final time, her gaze encompassing the entire room. To Mr. Gray, she proclaimed, her voice clear, resonant, triumphant. A man whose kindness to strangers has created the most unexpected opportunities. A man whose dignity reminds us all that integrity and decency will always find their proper reward. And with that, justice, quiet, subtle, and yet profoundly satisfying, had been served, elegant, complete, and irrevocable. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.